The year was 1977. Star Wars made its debut. The Apple II computer was released. Elvis Presley passed away at age 42. Our hometown Denver Broncos experienced their miracle season on the way to their first Super Bowl. Chuck E. Cheese Pizza opens their first location. And disco? It was nearing its peak in popularity. But something else happened that year that may have influenced the world more than any of these. The first wearable heart rate monitor was developed for the Finnish National Cross Country ski team. That development changed the way both professional and amateur athletes train, and it kicked the door open to our current wearables, which now provide more physiological data on our wrist than a room full of hospital gizmos could have done just a few decades ago. Welcome to the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, your trusted resource for engaging, evidence-based health, wellness, and performance insights. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360. Today's guest is one of the trailblazers in the application of that heart rate data, Sal Edwards. I have her groundbreaking book from the mid-90s on the practical use of heart rate monitors on my bookshelf, and I was thrilled when she agreed to join us today. But when I began preparing for this interview, her background, it just exploded off the pages of my notes. Yes, she's a leader in the world of heart rate monitoring, and that's where we'll focus our discussion. But she's also a serial entrepreneur, founding Fleet Feet, the largest chain of retail sports shops. She's written 24 books, 500 articles, and was a professional triathlete, ultra runner, won the Western States 100 miler, and is a member of the Triathlon Hall of Fame. And her four-person cycling team won the 1997 Race Across America in 7.5 days, which was just a few hours off the time it took Jerry Schemmel and myself to win the event in 2015. So we have a lot of fun rabbit trails available to us today. If you're an employer, EAP, or wellness company chasing rabbits in an effort to support and enhance the physical, emotional, and mental health of your employees or those you serve, Catalyst Coaching 360 might just be the solution you've been seeking. There's no starting over, no complex system. Simply plug best-in-class, nationally board-certified, personalized coaching into your current program or platform and watch the positive results come to life. Worth a discussion? Please reach out. The email is results@catalystcoaching360.com. That's results@catalystcoaching360.com. The 360 is the number 360. Or give me a call. My personal number is 303-521-1570. We'll set up some time to talk. And now, it's time to tap into the wisdom of the one and only Sal Edwards on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast.
Hey, Brad, this is going to be really cool. We're going to have fun today.
Absolutely. Now, your background, I mentioned in the intro to everybody that I thought we were going to be talking heart rate training, and then I got into your background and I went, whoa, this lady has done a lot of stuff. So before we jump into training stuff, let's do a rapid fire round, give folks a little more of a sense of who you are, all the things you've done. Let's start with most memorable race as a professional triathlete. Is there one that stands out? Maybe you didn't even win it. Maybe it wasn't one that you brought home a big prize, but for some reason that stuck out as a professional.
Well, sure. For those who've been racing a lot, possibly you've experienced this, which is you have a dream, and in your dream you cross the finish line, and the clock overhead has a number on a time. You do the math in triathlon, you add your swim, your T1, your bike, your T2, blah, and you get a final number, and you want the perfect race because you got the math come out. So I was racing, the Ironman had a a series, they don't do it anymore, of 4 Ironmans in 1 year. And I was very early on, I'm a pioneer in the sport of triathlon. I think I was the 3rd or 4th woman to ever finish an Ironman race in Hawaii. And so I was doing 4 races around the world, and one was in Japan. And it's a really good story about how the Japanese race, because in triathlon they race quite a bit differently than we do as Americans. The race finished in this 15th century castle.
Wow.
And you run across a moat and you go to the middle of the castle and there's a baseball diamond. And, you don't think of a castle, historically.
No, that's not that comes to mind when you think about triathlons.
Yeah. And so I crossed under the finish line at exactly the time that I've always had the dream, which was 10 hours and 42 minutes.
Wow.
And it was like, it was just like more than anything, the money and the place and that, because I finished second, was that the dream came true. And I think for all of us, if we aspire to do the best that we can, given, our genetics and our training, and you can reach that, it's the epitome of being an athlete.
Yeah. That's fun. I love that whole idea of vision. Love that. How did so you won the Western States 100 Ultra Run. You did the 4-person race across America. By the way, we did the 2-person, and you and I finished in almost precisely the same time. So I know your pain, my friend. I remember we could compare notes about the best and worst parts of that. But how did your 100-mile ultra run at Western States compare to the Ram race, which you've been quoted as saying was, I don't know if you said brutal or worst or what, but that was the one that kind of stood out in your mind of all the Ironmans and all these ultra runs. So compare those two for us.
Yes. Ram was really difficult because it's such an emotional race over such a long period. And we did the team division. And one of the women we were doing age 50 and over team at that time. And I'm 75 years old now. So, I've been racing for decades and decades and decades. And I'm just coming back to racing, which is another whole story about coming back when you're in your 70s. I wasn't on the team. 30 days before the race, I get a phone call. The woman who'd organized the team was killed in an automobile accident.
Wow.
And her name was Judy, and she was killed by a 13-year-old boy who was driving the car because his father was drunk and they were fishing and the father forced him to drive. And they said, in 30 days, can you get ready to do Race Across America? And I believe in a philosophy called 365 Fit, which is a little different than coaching 360. But 365 Fit is a philosophy I've had for a long time, which is 365 days out of the year. Almost anybody can call me and I'm in good enough shape that I can go cross-country ski or inline skate or, Race Across America was a bit of a stretch. And so there was that, and there was that I didn't really know the other team members very well. And then halfway across America, one of the women had to drop out from severe saddle sores. So and there was a lot of disagreement on the team. And
imagine that.
Imagine you never experienced that 7 days. And I got this shift at 2:00 in the morning when the drunks are all out and it's dark. So, it was really challenging on so many different levels. On the Western States 100-miler, I had won the race the second time I did it. The first time I did it for the experience, the second time to win. And then at the finish line after my second attempt, the second place finisher came up and said, "I'm after you next year. I'm going to beat you next year." So
it's on.
Yeah, game's on. And NBC television followed us, 2 women racing 100 miles across the Sierra Nevada. She was a really good athlete. The last time I saw her, we were doing a river crossing, which you hold on to a rope so you don't get swept down the river, and it's nighttime. And she was on one side of the bank and I was on. So we passed each other about 15 times. Wow. Her name was Bjorg Oström Smith. She went on and won it 10 times. Sure enough, when I came to the finish line, she had won the race. I finished second, and she came up to me and she said, "Edwards," and this is really an important lesson for athletes to learn. A lot of these lessons in life and in business, I've learned by racing and doing really hard things, which I really recommend everyone try.
Absolutely.
She said, "Edwards, if it wasn't for you, I never would have won this race and beaten you by an hour and a half." Yep. So in that last 20 miles, she put on the steam. And I learned that our competitors are our best friends.
Absolutely.
Our competitors, we really need them to be in the race, whether you finished first or I volunteered to finish last about 100 times in the Danskin Triathlon Series, which is an all-women's triathlon series, because they make you a better athlete. Mm-hmm. And anything, whether it's a training or food or coaching, anything that can make you a better athlete, we should invest in.
Yeah, the iron sharper iron, the community piece, it's such a big deal. I think my teammate at Ram would have loved to have your phone number, because I got in a bike wreck and broke 8 bones 6 weeks before we did a Race Across America. And he admitted later he was calling around, He's like, I don't think Coop's going to be able to do this. Do you want to jump? And it worked out. I was able to do it, but he would have liked to have your number. That might have worked out pretty well. All right. So you let's shift to business for a second here. You launched the largest retail sports chain in the country, Fleet Feet. I know Fleet Feet. We've got plenty of entrepreneurs who listen to the Catalyst 360 podcast. Any tips for and again, you're on a different level than all of us. You were running this huge retail chain, but any basic entrepreneurial guidance or tips that you can throw out to those of us who, again, more, maybe not day one, but more entry level and kind of getting our feet under us and the traction going there?
Yeah, I think what happened, and I started Fleet Feet when I was 28 years old. So the company is over 50 years old at this point. I think anytime that you can connect to your heart, and that's partly why I like heart rate sensors, it's partly why I like data. But if you can get your head and your heart together and connect and find mission, we're all on this planet. There's a purpose for us being here. It's not just to, eat crap and get through life. And once you've connected to that mission, and I think you have, if you would share a little bit, I'd appreciate that. We do better as human beings, and we can help each other more. And, what's at the point of being here if we don't help each other? And so I'm very happy that Fleet Feet, I sold it after running it for 17 years and franchising it. But I remember in those early days, the number of naysayers who said, you're never going to be successful. You have all these odds against you. I got a master's degree in exercise science. And then after at UC Berkeley in the late 60s, when the Vietnam War was going on, and I came back, I went to Vietnam for a year. I volunteered on the Red Cross. And when I did come back and said, I'm going to start a chain of retail, I'm going to start one store, not a chain. That wasn't part of the vision. And it was in Sacramento, California. My goal was, and I had a business partner, and the two of us did this together. Her name is Elizabeth Jansen. And I said, I want to get Sacramento fit. And how do I get my local town to do that? And Fleet Feet started the first running races and the first triathlons and some of the early marathons. And it's been I've been very fortunate. I love every day, and I love the work that I'm doing. And I'm going to continue doing. It gets better as I get older.
I love that. Please keep doing that. It just drives me bonkers. And I'm mid-50s, so you got a couple of years on me. But it drives me bonkers when I'll talk to a 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old who's like, well, I'm really slowing down. I'm like, if you're healthy when you hit your early 70s, you will very likely hit 100 or knock on the door to 100. You're just going to throw away 30 years or 40 years or 50 years? Come on. So, Sal, well done. Well done. How did you get involved as one of the pioneers in utilizing heart rate training? I bet that's an interesting story. How did that happen? I mean, I guess you were a pro triathlete, so you were probably playing with some of these toys and being asked to try some of these things out, but you didn't just try them. Like you're like, all right, I'm in.
I am a bit of a pioneer, so I wrote the first, and I mean this politely, not egotistically. I wrote the first book on triathlon training, the first book on heart rate training. I won a 100-mile snowshoe race in Alaska. And I've done a lot of adventure races and eco challenges, and I'm always interested in how far the human body can go. And when I was running Fleet Feet, I started using a heart rate monitor, and I wanted to qualify for the first ever women's Olympic trials that were held in 1984 in Olympia, Washington. And I started using a heart rate monitor, and there was only really one brand. It was almost $500, and people couldn't readily afford a $500.
Sure.
I don't know what to do with tool. And so I started using it, and I got absolutely fascinated with the numbers, because it is, and I want to ask you when I finish this, so don't let me forget why you have that book in your hands and when you got it and what it meant to you. And so I was giving a presentation at a women's running camp, and someone said to me, you need to write about that. And I responded with I never have this come out of my mouth, that I'm not very good at this, but I'm not a great writer. I'm more of a scientist than a journalist or a writer.
Sure.
And I said, I can't believe I said I can't do something. So it's like anytime you get challenged, don't challenge me because I'll go, I probably could do that. I could, probably race from here to there. And so I sat down and there was nothing. I mean, there was no research articles. There was nobody else had written about training with them. So I created something called zone training. And it was the very, very first time anybody said there's going to be 5 zones. We're going to base them on maximum heart rate. I don't use that anymore. I use threshold heart rate data. So there's different methodologies, but that was the only way to do it at the time because we didn't really have metabolic carts and, really ready. There were exercise labs, but not a lot of them. And so I traveled around the country and I interviewed a bunch of people and I asked a lot of questions and I said, I'll figure this out. So when I created the original zone training method, you have to figure out a lot of things. And I went to, in Polar, I said, Polar, it's great to have the tool, but if you don't have the application, it's just a waste of our time. Yeah. And when I ran in the Olympic trials, my goal was to run at 172 beats a minute. And how did I figure out that was that threshold that I could hold and not crash? So I practiced and learned on myself and my exercise science background and wrote the book, and it sold well over 1 million copies and was in 12 different languages and was quite popular until I wrote the first book on triathlon training. So, yeah.
I love that. And there's some funny stories I've read. We had Matt Fitzgerald, who wrote Iron War, join us, and he shares a hilarious story about Mark Allen, who wrote a blurb on the back of your book about in the early days of heart rate training, it wasn't device specific. So if you and I are running together, I can mess with you. And his training partners would mess with him. They'd get their heart rate monitors, they'd ride up next to him, and he was trying to keep it very low in that zone 1, zone 2. And his training partners would ride up and like hyperventilate, and his readout would say he was too high. So he'd slow down even more and more till he was almost standing still on his bike. He's like, what's wrong with my heart? So yes, there's some fun stories from those early days. No doubt.
And answer my question, how did you get that? You just showed me a copy of the heart rate monitor book, which I probably wrote, I don't know, you'd have to look at the inside.
I think it was 97.
1990, so 30.
Yeah, I think this one was 97. Copyright 93. So this was not the first edition. This was the 97 edition. So it must have been a couple of years later. But I think it was just like everything else in my life. I'm a miniature version of Sal Edwards in terms of, let's just try it. When I did Race Across America, I'd never ridden more than 130 miles in my life. It's a 3,000-mile race. I went back and got a PhD at age 50. Wow. That's kind of weird. Wow. I started a podcast. I didn't know what I was doing. My wife said, well, why don't you just try one and, see how it goes. And this is 257 weeks later. So I'm kind of a miniature version of you in terms of let's try it. Let's push the envelope. I wanted to see if I could break a 5-minute mile at age 50. So it's just, a lot of those little things similar to you with different narratives around them, but similar concept. And I was looking for tools to try to achieve those things. So well done. Thank you. All right, so let's jump into heart rate training. Why does heart rate matter? And what are some of the key concepts that someone needs to understand about using that in their training? And I'm going to use training in quotes here. I'd like to try to address the full spectrum, the person that's just getting started and wants to use it as they gradually build up as a runner or cyclist or whatever it might be. And also the person that's dialing in that marathon, that 10K, that whatever. Can you kind of walk us through both ends of that spectrum?
Sure. So I'll start with a little bit of the basic.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And that heart rate is this global number. It encompasses so much. It can be used for measuring your emotional state, for example. And from your science background that as we get excited and an example I can remember, there was a 10-mile race that I was going to run, and I got, the starting line of the Olympic trials, I wasn't contracting a muscle. My heart rate was at 100 beats a minute. I was so excited. It was such a historic moment for women that finally
that was Joe Manoisier, right?
Yeah. Joan Benoit Samuelson won that race. And so it is assessing that. And then I was at another race. It was a 10-mile race, and I'm at the starting line, and my heart rate's 55 or 60. Which race do you think I perform better in? Brad, I think you know that answer. It's the one where I'm excited and I'm looking forward, and I'm not just like, oh, it's just another race. I don't care about it. So it measures the emotion. The second thing that heart rate monitors are really good at is obviously measuring effort. So how much intensity, how hard are you going? And there's kind of two offshoots of that. One is for training and the other is for racing. So on the training side, there are lots of different philosophies of training. So I won't say that this person's Carl Foster's 80-20 or Steven Seiler or any, we were talking earlier about a couple other people, of being able to set yourself zones. And when I created the original heart zone training program and started with max heart rate, this mid zone, this moderate exercise called the yellow zone, zone 3, a little bit of zone 4 were really popular. And today that's kind of taken a different twist. And I believe training is a bit of a pendulum and it swings back and forth. There's a whole swing for the whole linear, long, slow distance, low heart rates, just go forever. A lot of what the Kenyans do for training. Mm-hmm. And then it swings back the other way and it goes into HIIT training and, high and how hard. And really what there is HIIT training, mid training, which is moderate, and lit training, which is low. There's really 3 different kinds of intervals, not just this one concept. Is one of the ways the best way to do that is to measure your heart rate, realizing that its influence is global by a lot of different factors. And some of those factors are really important. And there's 30 or 40 of them, from medication to food to sleep to stress and that kind of thing. In racing, I have found that there appears to be 2 different kinds of athletes, and I'd be curious what you are. There's the athlete that's what I call a data-based racing. I like numbers, and on a bike, I have a power meter. I have a dashboard with all kinds of other data. I have a heart rate, and I use all of that data to make cognitive decisions about my racing. Where other people, it just beats them up when they see numbers, or they don't like them, or they have an opinion. But I have found when I race in Ironman distance races, I set heart rate numbers that I want to hit. And I have spotters sometimes along the course that'll tell me, where your position. And it really is motivational for me. But I think the most important thing about heart rate monitor I haven't even covered yet is about engagement. I'm really interested in my physiology. I'm really interested in my individual response to different circumstances, like where the competition is, what is the weather, what's my hydration. And heart rate is really valuable, that number for me, to engage me, both in my understanding my own physiology, but also in how I apply it. And coaches can really help in terms, because the general public, and it's so funny, we train personal trainers and certifications in my company, Heart Zones. And I'll ask them, well, do you know how to use the data from a heart, not how to use a heart monitor, how to use the information it provides? And they will say, oh, yes, I use 220 minus my age or heart reserve. Or, yeah. And then I say, you gotta let go of that. That's really old and dated, and it doesn't apply. It means that we all wear the same, you're 6 feet tall, you wear men's size 9, somebody else is not, the world is not at shoe size 9, nor are our heart rate numbers the same. So I really like the individualization. I like the personalization. Heart rate is very mode specific. And so for triathletes, we need to know our zones for swimming, which are much different than cycling. And I'm a runner, so my highest numbers, and it doesn't matter how high your heart rate. What matters is what percent or what threshold numbers they're at, and how long you can sustain them, and understanding that you have to go inside yourself. And that internal, in one of my Ironmans, I set, my swim heart rates, my bike heart rate numbers, my running heart rate numbers. And I was in second place, and I was down, I was in fifth place, and I was down, started the marathon, I was down 26 minutes. Well, a marathon is 26 miles. So I have to outrun the first place woman by a minute a mile. And that's tough to do. And psychologically, I could have just said, I'm going to quit. There's no point to it. But this motivational tool, this engagement tool called the heart rate monitor, for those of us that are data-driven athletes, is the most powerful tool that you can possibly have. And when I caught her at mile 25, my max heart rate is 100 and remains the same at 100, running is 195 beats a minute. As I caught her, I looked down at my heart rate monitor and it said 188 beats a minute. I mean, that's 7 beats below. And most exercise scientists will say, when you're out on those lava fields and you're running after that many hours, we can't test that in lab. We can't measure that. We can't get an athlete to do that combination of fatigue and competition and desire to win. You just can't put that together. And I just metaphorically threw away my heart rate monitor and I ran with my emotional heart. And I beat her by a minute and a half. Yay. But you can accomplish things. And there's a time when you should throw that heart rate monitor and run or swim or bike with your perceived exertion, because if you try to do the math, you'd say it's impossible to maintain this kind of intensity. So I felt, I have this love. It's really weird. I have this love. And now it's wonderful because the heart monitor was the very first wearable. We didn't, in the early 1980s when I was training with them, the word wearable didn't even exist.
Wasn't a thing, right?
Yeah, and where it's going is just, and I'm happy to share what's coming in the future with all of this, is just going to be phenomenal for us.
Well, we can't tease the audience that much. You got to go ahead, bring it on. Let's hear what we got coming around the corner here.
Well, it may surprise some of your listeners to hear this, but we're somewhat still in the infancy with wearables. So there's different phases. Our first phase was like a heart monitor, just give me some data. I mean, just to have this data, and then it evolved, and we want our technology to evolve. Sure. And our second was the interpretation of that. What does the data mean? Which is what zone training is trying to put this into some kind of context. And the third, which I think you're deeply involved with, is to use this as prescription. So that we can set goals and train more appropriately. But there's another phase coming, which is the fourth phase, which is there's going to be all of these new sensors. I know we now have blood oxygen. We're going to have blood pressure. We're going to have blood glucose, and the plethora of physiological data that we're going to have, lactate levels and measurements of individual muscle fatigue in the working muscles, and the stress on our hearts. And so though we have we're getting teased with that now. And what many of the scientists have tried to do is put all of that data into some kind of magical number, which is an index or a formula for, recovery and overtraining and overcompensation. But it's going to be, what's coming is exciting.
Yeah, no doubt. Let me peel a couple things out that I know where you're going with this, but some folks might be going, wait, what did she say? So the 220 minus your age, that's something we've been learning since I was in undergrad in 85, 86, 87. So it was the thing then. It's, as you said, old school, outdated, inaccurate, almost worse than not using anything at all. And it sounds to me like you don't work on max heart rate now, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is how you recommend finding your max heart rate. But am I hearing you correctly? That's not a key indicator in your book at this point?
Yeah, I think most of the leading exercise scientists will negate max heart rate training today. And there needs to, when you take a max heart rate in my world is kind of like a religion, and all these people believe in it and they have faith. In something that's relatively useless.
Okay.
Because it's a fixed number. It doesn't change. Supposedly you get worse as you get older, which is not true at all. And so I've worked pretty extensively with a PhD exercise, and I encourage you to have him on your program, named Carl Foster. And Carl Foster is at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse. He's a professor emeritus. And, he took me aside and he said, Sally, you write all these books. I've written over 24 now on training and exercise and weight loss and triathlons and running and stress and so much. But there's a better way to do this, and that's called threshold training. And in the labs, they use metabolic carts. So they're measuring ventilation, or they're measuring setting zones based on your ventilatory thresholds. And that has to do with the ratio. I know you know this, but I'm saying it for your audience.
No, that's great.
Of carbon dioxide and oxygen, or they're measuring lactate. And lactate's a really hard one to get to. It's not very precise. You have to draw blood, and it's just kind of difficult when you're actually doing it. Threshold training is and Heart Zones, my company, filed a federal patent on threshold. It's called the Threshold Training System, if anybody wants to look up our patent. Because when I created the original maximum heart rate training system, which I did create, and I'm not trying to be a brag or saying that, but in the book you just held up, that was written 30 years ago.
Yeah,
oh,
crazy.
God. People are still using formulas. The fact of life is you have to go and move your body to be able to measure something. You just can't use a formula for blood pressure or body weight. I can't look at you and know your percent body fat, or you have to go do something. And threshold training is, I'll explain it in really simple language. It's quite a bit more complex, but that time when you're just kind of jogging along and you're whistling and you're not fatigued, and you just say, I could do this for a long, long time. And then you go a little faster and you reach this point where you kind of say, I feel a shift. I feel a change. It's really it's not exactly like, oh, wow, but it's just like, I got to breathe a little more, and it's a little bit harder. And that's called T1, the first threshold, the low threshold. Scientists call it VT1 and LT1, simplifying it. It's the low threshold. It's the first threshold. It's T1. And that's the top of a zone called the green zone, zone 2. And then once you get above that, you're in this beautiful, wonderful land, which is the yellow and orange zone. And the yellow and orange zone, zone 3 and zone 4, are this moderate intensity effort. And at moderate intensity effort, you can go for a long, long time. And it's where you get that, you break a sweat, you feel really good. You go, wow, I'm training hard. And then you're going to go a little faster. You're going to go from yellow to orange. They're the colors of the thermometer as it gets hotter and hotter. But when you get to the top of the orange zone, just before you hit that red zone, is the second threshold. Scientists, and you can read in all of the scientific journals, called it VT, ventilatory threshold 2, lactate threshold 2. In the old days, it was called OBLA and anaerobic threshold, and a bunch of words that really are trying to describe. And that's the point of where it's not sustainable any longer when you cross that second threshold. And when you cross that second threshold, you get into the red zone. That's the land of high intensity interval training. That's where you would do your HIIT training. And there's in threshold training, there's two different things that happen. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're doing good.
All right, because if it's getting where you go, Sal.
I'll circle back with you because, let me circle back with one question here. So the low threshold is, like you say, you can just go forever. The yellow and orange, maybe that's pace work or kind of tempo, half marathon pace. Is that kind of what we're talking about? 10K pace, something like that?
Yes, that's the that moderate intensity that you just kind of put on your shoes and you want to go have just a really good workout and you want to come back and feel, wow, I had a good workout.
Okay, so you're not pushing that one. That's not a tempo run or a pace run. That's below that level.
Just right below that.
Okay.
And some like Carl Foster and Steven Seiler will call that the black hole. And black hole training is detrimental to your training. If you're a racer, if you're interested in weight loss, that yellow and orange zones, I call them the golden zones. If you want to lose weight, then you have to, without spending, enormous numbers of years, you burn a lot of calories, you burn a lot of, it's 50-50 carbohydrates to fat. So you're learning how to utilize different energies. Those yellow and orange zones are golden zones for weight loss, but for athletic performance, it's the black hole. Okay. The only time you want to be there is on the way to the red zone, or on the way down to the blue and green zone, zone 1 and zone 2, because that moderate intensity doesn't give you enough rest to be able to go hard. So if you want to go hard and do some intervals, you have to recover. And when you're in the yellow and orange zone, that's not a time for recovery at all.
So it's kind of coming back to the old statement that the wrong place to be, in this case, the black hole, is we train too hard on our easy days and too easy in our hard days if we're wanting to race. And again, I want to emphasize what Sal's saying here. That's not true if this is for general fitness, for health. That's not a bad zone at all. That's a wonderful zone. She said that's almost the key zone, the gold zone, maybe we should call it. But if you're trying to get a PR in a 10K marathon, triathlon, whatever, then you want to be at the extremes. You want to be at the high end. You want to be at the low end.
Right.
Okay.
And that's when athletes say to me, gee, I'm training harder than I've ever trained before, and I'm getting slower.
Yeah.
They're doing that high, moderate training day after day after day after day.
Never
instead of,
recovered.
I got to have an easy day, and I got to have a hard day. And maybe I have to have 2 days of rest. Some people need 3 days of rest.
But these are not based on a max. You don't have your athletes go out and run a 400 and check their heart rate at the tail end of that 400. You're using a different system. Is that right?
Yes. And for those, at the end of the 400, you want to make sure your heart rate is at T2, the second threshold, the high threshold, and above. Yes, because that's why you're running an all-out 400. Then you don't want to go again. In the early days, because I was racing, in the 1970s, we only had a stopwatch and distance. Those are the only tools we had. We'd be on a track, so we'd know distance, or we'd go with our little wheel. We used to, I don't know if you remember the days, we'd measure courses with a wheel. Sure. Yeah, we didn't have GPS. It was really, and then a heart rate monitor came along, and we went, wow, we now can measure ourselves and our response to our effort. And we can measure our morning heart rates. We can measure our recovery heart rates and watch those improvements and get excited that I'm getting fitter. And the reason I'm getting fitter and I'm getting faster is I have a system. I have a plan. I have a goal. I have a belief system, let's call it, right, that I can train. And I've tried a lot of different training methodologies over these years to come to the conclusions that I've reached. for me, but that may not have, I don't think the individual nature of the athlete has really been taken into consideration. And, when you have training plans that are written by artificial intelligence, and I kind of chuckle because I've always believed that coaches and athletes really, we need to work in partnership with each other, but we all need to learn and grow about the individual nature of training.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, everybody's unique. Let's talk a little bit about, so you train on heart rate, and you were talking about using your heart rate out there at Kona. Would you recommend that an athlete use a heart rate on race day, or do you say, by that point, we need to take it away? Are there influences, for example, of you train in Salt Lake City, Utah, and you race in Kona, Hawaii, unbelievably different settings? We're in Colorado, so similar with us, very dry, cooler versus hot, humid, but higher altitude, lower altitude. Do you take those? Are there algorithms you can use for that? Or do you say, don't need them because the heart is the heart? And if you're working hard at X level in Colorado and you take that same heart rate target to Kona, it will adjust for all these different variables that are coming at you. Which one is it? Do we throw it out on race day, or do we know it's the same, or is it some combination of those two?
Brad, I think you know the answer to the question you asked, but I will answer with two words, which it depends. And those two words, it depends, I think every coach and every athlete really take to heart, because it really depends on you and how you respond to those situations. I've done 16 Ironmans, and during one of those, I sat on the bike at 155 beats a minute for 6 hours. I was at 100. I wasn't going to go to 160 beats a minute or 150. I sat on that number, and it was so hard to do because in the early phases, those without some data were using perceived exertion, and you feel really, you're not tired. It's easy. And so they'd come flying by me on the bike. Yep. And it really takes maturity to say, I'm going to race my race my way. I'm not chasing down anybody. My ego's not going to get in it. I'm going to hold 155 beats a minute. Yep. And then you turn around at Hawaii and you start riding back, and you start passing these yahoos that were, they're fried. And it's just like, I'm so happy you didn't take any of my advice or read anything I've written over 50 years of writing about training exercise, because you just lost. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure they've mismarked the Kona bike course. I'm pretty sure mile 80 is actually where the finish line is supposed to be, the 112, and somehow they added on another 32 miles, because I always feel it at mile 80. I'm like, okay, I'm good for the run now. Nope.
Yeah. Nope. We're going to stay on the bike another couple hours.
Exactly. So it just depends. You got to know the athlete. You got to know if someone is, as you described yourself in that specific race, dedicated to staying with it. Can you carry over your zones, your race day target heart rate from a dry, cool place to a hot, humid place, or vice versa, going from a hot, humid, but low altitude to a higher altitude race? Can you, if you're okay with that mental challenge, is it okay to carry those targets with you as you go?
I think the science shows us that you cannot do that. Okay. That altitude really does affect the stress, because heart rate is measuring stress, environmental stress, like you were just describing with temperatures and humidity. The body wants to cool itself, so the heart's going to pump. these things, Brad, pump blood to the exterior, and we're going to lose. The muscles are going to have to lose some of that. So you do have to make adjustments, and you sometimes have to make those adjustments during the race too. You have to say, well, maybe I need to, temper my dream and adjust because, of the winds, and particularly in races like Hawaii, where those headwinds and those side winds are just brutal. And so I want to turn this and ask you a question. Is that all right?
Sure.
So how has using heart rate or power meters or any data, where did you start, and then how, I assume it evolved as you learned, and where are you today?
Yeah, my wife will tell you that I turn into an extreme optimist at the starting line. So I have a really good plan coming in, and then somehow my brain says, yeah, you were planning on running 2:46 in this marathon, but you had that one really good workout, and I think you could probably go 2:29. I mean, it's only 17 minutes difference. And then I run that for the first half and blow up, and it's the same. So I think where I would need to go, and where especially the power meter, because I'm just now coming back to the heart rate monitor, but the power meter has benefited me by doing exactly what you did in that Kona race with your heart rate, of saying you're going to ride at 200 watts or whatever the number is, period. It doesn't matter. I don't care how good you feel. I don't care where your competition is. You got a marathon coming. You are not leaving that. If you get over 203, we're just going to flatten your tire because you're off target. So I think that's where I've used it when it's gone well, and where I haven't used it when it hasn't gone well.
And why are you going back to heart rate? I have heard that more and more. So
I think it's because it's on my radar screen again. I think I moved from, okay, heart rate, that's really cool, to, hey, this power meter, that's amazing. And then the GPS has allowed me to go off of pace. And now you're seeing so much with whether it's Alan Cousins or Seiler, like you mentioned, or some of these other folks that are showing it works. And we're seeing the Norwegian model come back to the forefront. And so I'm not an industry leader by any means in this. So I'm following those people and saying, oh, interesting. I think that's worth a try. So I'm being drawn to it. It's like a magnet for me.
Oh, good. Good. Well, and they have become more comfortable.
Yes.
They have become without a million buttons and either wire. I mean, my first heart rate monitor was wired, yeah, and it went across your chest, and there was a big box, and It was, so they've become smaller and funner and cheaper, and if we can evolve to adding coupling it with some other data, I think that they'll continue to be more and more valuable to all of us. And it's not just like a power meter is really good. It tells you right at the moment, what is my power? And then I can use that math but a heart rate monitor is good for recovery, for waking up in the morning, for making decisions about my training plan, that a power meter it can't, it's not the purpose of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, let me throw a couple more out here. I am cognizant of your time. Again, I really appreciate you joining us. Let me just get one off the table that I know the answer to, but a lot of folks will be like, what? If you and I are training buddies and you have a higher max heart rate than I do, does that matter?
Not in the slightest.
Let's say that again. Not in the folks. Take that one off the table. Stop being like, oh, this person has a 210 and mine's only 175. Okay. Doesn't matter. We're working on percentage here. So Thank you.
Yeah. And when you see those absolute numbers and, I'm racing at 172 beats a minute in a marathon, somebody else is running 155, we're running the same pace with really big differences. It doesn't matter. Yeah, and that's why your comment about percentage is, if you were using max heart rate, which I encourage you to depart from and try threshold training. And there's some field tests that are really easy to do to set these threshold zones and to measure training load, which I think is one of the most essential data points we can have, is how much exercise stress did I apply, either during the individual workout and over a period of time. Training load is probably the most important number that we could have. And you can use heart rate to figure that out.
Could you give us an easy example of a field test that somebody could use out there that's going, oh, wow, this sounds really interesting. I'm going to buy her books, all 24 of them, and read all 500 articles she wrote. But is there one field test that you could throw out to us that people could use if they want to figure out this threshold category?
Yes, and I always give credit where credit is due. It is called the Foster, because Carl Foster developed it, threshold. Can you speak comfortably field test. And that test he originated. It used to be called the talk test, but it's really not the talk test as much as can you feel comfortably. So the field test, and it's on the Heart Zone's website and in almost everything I've written, is every 10. You go up 10 beats every 30 seconds. So you go up 10 beats and you say, can I talk? Oh yeah, I can talk. I can whistle. And you go up another 10 beats. And some people go up in 5-beat increments, and it's not precise, sure. But there's a point where you feel a shift in your breathing. You go, I have to breathe a little harder, a little faster, a little deeper. And we're trying to find a wearable that will actually measure the depth and frequency of respiration, which is what we're doing. Actually, it's ventilation, not respiration. And so then I'm going to go up another 5 or 10 beats, and then another 5 or 10 beats. And then there's this second threshold. And everybody that races knows that second threshold. That's when I can't speak comfortably anymore. I don't want to speak. I don't want to talk. I don't want to joke around. I call it deer in the headlights. It's where you kind of wiggle your butt on a bike seat and you get scummy. You try to get a little more power, and you say in your brain, this isn't sustainable for more than, and again, it depends. If you're a professional, 60 minutes. Sure. If you're an amateur, 45 minutes. If you're a regular fitness person, 30 minutes. If you're unfit, 15 minutes. Okay. So it depends. And you say, I wonder if I could hold this for 30 minutes. That second threshold is the other that sets the zones. So it's below the first threshold, between the first and second threshold, and above that second threshold, T2. It's a very simple 3-zone model, and it can be divided into a 5-zone model. But that field test, I recommend people do that once a month if you're racing. And the goal is try to raise that second threshold as high as you can towards your, I don't like even the word maximum. I use the word peak heart rate. What is the highest heart rate I've really ever seen? Because you can go out and do a max heart rate test, but you can get in a race and get a higher number. Just the way it works. I'm sprinting at the finish, and there's somebody right in front of me, and I don't like that person.
So then for training, for the folks that are wanting to improve their 5K to marathon to triathlon, whatever, most of your training would then be in that zone 1 in the 3-zone area. And then occasionally you're in 3 and you're trying to generally stay out of 2 unless your goals are weight loss and general fitness, if you will. Right.
And I really appreciate that you're not saying, what is my target zone? There is no such. There are a lot of heart rate myths, and this is idea of a target zone, like there's one zone that I'm going to target. No, there are good things happen in every one of these zones. Important. So, there's good benefits in training in low intensity. There's good benefits in moderate intensity. There's good benefits at high intensity. And what the body really wants is, it wants what's called variability training. It wants variety. It doesn't want to put on my running shoes. I'm going to go run for 30 minutes. That's called monotony training. And what happens is you don't get better when you do the same workouts the same way, the same time. So when I wrote the very first book on triathlon training, and I coined the word cross training in that book, I made the statement that you'll be a better athlete if you, in your single sport, if you'll swim, if you'll have variety, if you'll swim one day and whatever your primary sport is, and complement it rather than just run to be a great runner. And the scientists came after me and said, Edwards, you don't know what you're talking about. Sports specificity is one of the primary 10 principles of the Bible of training. And I said, no, it's not. And so that continuing argument about monotony and variability training continues to this day.
So let's end where we started. What's in store for Sal Edwards? You're active, you're making a difference. What do you see the next 5 to 10 years in your life?
Well, at the very exact moment right now, I'm interested in virtual training. So virtual reality is and fitness is a very intriguing a way of exercising going into the metaverse. But what I'm personally doing is I spent 22 years racing, not racing, as a professional athlete working for Danskin. Danskin's a women's apparel company. We had 600,000 women do an all-women's triathlon. They're the largest triathlons in the world at the time. And I volunteered to finish last. So in over almost 150 races, I finished dead last. And I learned so much by leading from the back,
sure,
which is not an American concept, which is you're the general, you got to be in the front, you got to be the corporate leader and all of that. But if you put your fellow athletes and honor and recognize and appreciate them. And then some bad things happened to the Danskin and it imploded and blah, and la-di-da happens. And so I've sat out for a number of years and I turned 75. And last summer I said to myself, I was reading a triathlete magazine. I haven't really raced in quite a while. And I live in Oregon now, and there's the Oregon State Championship. Maybe I'll just go try to be the Oregon State champion. So I did that. Of course, there was nobody in the 75 and over, the 70 and over, the 65 and over, the 60. There's no women or any in the sprint race. So that qualified me for the nationals in Milwaukee, a USA Triathlon Nationals. And I thought, well, I'll go to Milwaukee. I'll train a couple of weeks and we'll just do it for fun, not for real. And I lost first place by 20 seconds.
Oh,
really bothered me. But that's now qualified me for the world championship. So I've gone from this professional back to this I was an amateur and then a professional. Now I'm back to an amateur at the age of 75. I'm going to get on the podium at the world championships. I'm going to train this time.
I love it.
And I'm going to take all of this knowledge and all these years and all this experience, and I'm going to be on that podium in July in Hamburg, Germany.
Love it. What a great way to wrap. Sal, thank you. Thank you for joining us, but thank you for what you're doing, what you've been doing, the impact you've had. It's an honor to have you join us today. Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. And thanks for allowing us to be a regular part of your week as we all look to write a story that improves with each passing day. If you're looking to earn your MBHWSC approved coach certification, our next cohort kicks off in April, so you still have time to join us. If you're curious about details or you have questions about how it aligns with either your current or future career plans, please reach out. We can talk it through. Results at Catalyst Coaching 360 or 720-339-4292. That's results at catalystcoaching360.com or 720-339-4292. And now it's time to be a catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360's Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.